You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey Vet Rehabbers, it's another one of my Behind the Vet Rehab Practice podcasts this week. For those of you that are new to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My Behind the Vet Rehab Practice podcasts are one of my favorite interviews to do. And what I love about them is that I get to interview vet rehabbers from all over the world, and they share with us their wins and their losses. And although it's not great that they made mistakes, when they share them, we get to learn from them. So when we find ourselves in that same position, we have hindsight, which we would never have had before. So you get to fast track your success by not repeating the same mistakes that they made. Now, if you're not already a member, please come and join the largest vet rehabber community on Facebook. We have 4 Facebook groups: the Small Animal Vet Rehabbers, Hydro Vet Rehabbers, Equine Vet Rehabbers, and the Business Vet Rehabbers. This is where the vet rehabbers hang out online. We share knowledge, tips, and advice, and it's a great supportive community, and we would love to have you online there with us. Nutrition plays a really essential role in wound healing and recovery, and we know that poor nutrition before or during the healing process can delay healing and impair wound strength, making the wound more prone to breakdown. Knowledge of nutrition is really important for our patients. We have just finished up this 4-part series on our small animal membership. It was called The Role of Nutrition in Canine Rehab Patients, and it was with Lisa Hannaby. The first lecture was on general nutrition, then nutrition for stressed or competitive dogs, nutrition for healing and immunity, and then feeding the microbiome. So Onlinepethealth small animal dual and multi-members, we've just loaded the recordings into our library. You can access them now, and we now have 164 hours of small animal specific vet rehab training there. So today I speak with Jenny Moe from Doggon Wheels. COVID and some changes in the legislation in her state encouraged her to pivot her business, and she decided to buy Doggon Wheels after hearing the owners were selling. It's now a family-run business. Together with her husband Ron, Jenny runs Doggon Wheels from her home in San Francisco Bay Area. She shares with us her journey into vet rehab and how she went from the safety of employment to running her own business. I really enjoyed this chat with Jenny, and I really think you will too. Hey Jenny, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi Megan, thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Jenny, for the listeners, why don't you tell us how you got into the field of vet rehab?
I became a physical therapist. I got my license in 2003 and worked in pediatrics, which I loved for quite a long time. And I honestly just stumbled into it. I have a bit of a different path than a lot of people, and it was a bit more of serendipity involved. I always wanted to work with animals and was actually looking into bringing like a therapy or facility dog into my practice anyway, and was looking to change the position where I was. Thing was quite working out as a perfect fit, and I stumbled upon a post looking for a physical therapist at a practice that was a specialty practice in the Bay Area, then was Veterinary Surgical Associates, and now it's called Sage. And I thought, well, I'd heard of physical therapists working with animals, but it wasn't really very popular. It wasn't, it was just emerging at the time. So I decided, well, I'll go chat with them. And during my interview, wound up treating in Newfoundland. So, it's very intuitive. It's just physical therapy applied to a different population, and working with kids, you have to be very creative and making all of your treatments very functional and part of what you would do anyways. It was very easy to apply that to animals. So they agreed to help me get my certification, and it's just kind of picked up the ball and ran with it from there.
Yeah, if I think back to like pediatrics, I don't know what age you treat it up to, but there are a lot of similarities between babies and animals because they can't talk to us, right?
Very much so.
That's one of the things. If you're treating an adult, especially, you can be like, all right, when you move like this, where exactly is it painful and how does it feel? Whereas with animals and babies, we're in exactly the same position. We have no idea. We have to be intuitive and we have to feel and try and work it out.
Right. Yeah, it's very much, you're observing all the time and looking for subtle signs of discomfort. A lot of the kids that I worked with, anywhere from babies up till 21 and older, a lot of pretty significantly impacted kids with cerebral palsy and other motor issues. So lots of neuro in there, which was great because the San Francisco area has lots of neurologists. So we had, and I worked directly with neurologists at Sage. So I had tons of cases like that where I could easily apply my knowledge. And also you do lots of bracing and assistive devices with kids. I did lots of like kinesiology taping and stuff with them, and had learned pretty quickly. I'm like, well, I can just take everything that I was doing there. And I'm like, well, sure, let's try it with a lot of trial and error, but it all crossed over pretty easily. So I think that was 2009 where I crossed over to the furry side, as I like to say.
You just reminded me of something when I was in practice. It must have been about maybe 2011, 2012. I had a veterinary physiotherapist that was working for me, and she would come like 2 afternoons a week and see cases. And I got referred a puma that is diagnosed with cerebral palsy, actually. And I remember thinking, we didn't even learn about cerebral palsy in animals, in veterinary school at all. So I had no idea. And Animal Planet actually came and filmed the treatment.
That's so neat.
And I called the physiotherapist. I said, "You better get here. This is your one. This is not one for me. I don't know anything about this condition." And so she came, and she just pretty much the same thing. She had been a human physio first and just extrapolated all her knowledge and was treating the puma on Animal Planet at my practice. So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Quite awesome.
That's my dream.
Yeah.
I love cats, and it would be just such an amazing opportunity to get to work with a big cat.
You'll definitely have to come and visit us in South Africa, because we've got lots of cats, lots of wild cats, right?
That's
lions
amazing.
And leopards and cheetahs.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. A friend of mine in Florida has had the opportunity to work with a few panthers that had arthritis and are now they're not in a zoo, they're in like a sanctuary situation. But I was helping her brainstorm through some different things that she could do and like how to get them to do different things. And I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous right now.
Yeah. We've got like a few cheetah rescue centers. You'd easily be able to come visit and volunteer it. They'd love to have you.
I was going to say that might be my next vacation.
Yeah. Well, in 2024, hopefully the IAVRPT conference is going to be in Cape Town. So you might have the opportunity in 2 years' time.
The stars are aligning to get my hands on some big cats. This is great.
All right, so let's chat about, so you obviously started working at Sage, and how long did you work there for? So that was 2009, you said.
Yeah, I started in later 2009 and worked there full-time through 2018, and then on a more casual basis up until 2021, when we'll talk about Doggon Wheels in a minute.
Yeah.
So that was amazing. They're just a great, very busy specialty practice with 4 locations. Now they've expanded, but it started out with 4 in the San Francisco area.
And were you the only therapist, or were there other therapists?
It was at the time that when I started, Surgeon, who's now the medical director for Sage, she had gotten certified through the Canine Rehab Institute and had 2 veterinary technicians. They call them nurses. A lot of the clinics here in the area do. So they had 2 nurses who were certified. And so Julie would do the evaluations and the technicians would do the majority of the treatment, very much like, veterinary practice. And she said that she was just realizing that at the end of the day, she was still a surgeon. And she really wanted to have rehab there to help her patients and all the other surgical patients and neuro, as they were bringing neuro on board, and really wanted to bring in a physical therapist. So that really made an impression on me when I was interviewing, that she recognized that our ability, especially she really highlighted in manual therapy. She said, as for as many classes as she might be able to take, she's like, she just didn't think that she was going to get to the same level, as recognized our expertise there. So I was very lucky to be introduced to the field in such a supportive environment.
Yeah, I know, and I can really understand it. When I think about my practice, it was also myself, and then I had physio working there, and I had a massage therapist and a hydrotherapist. Wow. And it was really a team approach. There were things that I would do, and then there were things that they would be a whole lot better than me at. So I'd always call upon them to do it, So, I would see most of the cases in the beginning, sometimes doing diagnostics, sometimes just, getting a plan. And then generally the physio would come in and we'd create a plan together. And then I would often see the cases if there was problems, if you had the cruciate that suddenly was off its leg, then quickly call me in. And then I was doing a lot of acupuncture. So, but yeah, definitely from the manual side, we don't really get taught to palpate. We get taught to examine, but palpation is not, we were never taught in a veterinary exam to palpate muscles. That was never a thing. We literally, when you did an orthopedic exam, you just ran your hands down the animal and you focused on the joints, right? Focus on the bone, feel the bone, are there any fractures? And then you go to the joint, flex and extend it, but never all the things in between. And that was only a skill that I learned after I started doing rehab. So yeah, I definitely think majority of vets, I think we're lacking in that. And I'm sure some of the vets get those skills if they concentrate on them. But for some of us, maybe it's not our forte.
Right. Yeah, our practice was very much the same, and I really appreciate it. I spent a lot of time with the surgeons at first because I really wanted to understand how they did approach things. I had experience working with human physicians and surgeons, but I really wanted to understand the different conditions, and was so lucky that I could go in and actually watch the surgeries, like the TPLOs and hemilaminectomies and kinds of different things, to really see what it was great to also get a good perspective of what the patient goes through, to see, all this soft tissues that you have to get to the bones and joints and everything in order to fix them. I had all these specialists at my fingertips that if something wasn't looking right, I'm like, you know what, let me go grab, or, let me take Fido back and, let me just have somebody check them, and worked very seamlessly like a team. And I really was fortunate to be able to learn. And I think that's the team approach, and having that collaboration is just so important.
Yeah. So through those years that you worked there, what were the biggest challenges that you faced?
Good question. Honestly, I think my biggest challenge was managing the demand. There was always far too many patients than we could handle, which is a wonderful problem to have, right? In the beginning, it was actually pretty slow. They just had rehab in one location 2 days a week, and I was technically going to be between two of the different locations. And so it was established in one, and I had to basically build it up in the next one. And all of the referrals were coming from outside of Sage, which was baffling to me. I'm like, but we're doing all the surgeries, so why aren't, you would expect it to be the other way around. So in the beginning, I guess my challenge was educating all of the surgeons and the specialists, as well as the general practitioners in the area, of what physical therapists do. We had a couple clinics in the area, but a lot of the times I would call one of the veterinarians and say, the general veterinarian or primary vet, and let them know that I was seeing their patient for a rehab consultation. And they'd say, oh, well, that's great, but so what do you do? Yeah. And a lot of times, they didn't always have the time to have full discussion, but I never came across anyone who was opposed to that, and always very curious. And then when they would start to see their patients getting better, especially the older dogs who didn't necessarily have one particular thing wrong, they have a little bit of neuro, a little bit of ortho, as they started to see those dogs regain function and get stronger, then they'd start referring more. So a lot of it was education at first. And then it's always been a big challenge of trying to keep up with the demand.
Yeah.
So there's always need for more rehab practitioners.
And so it sounds like the vets though were very open to the treatments. They just weren't really sure exactly what you were able to achieve.
Yeah, a lot of them didn't even know that they had access to be able to refer to physical rehab, whether I was a physical therapist or not. They just weren't really aware of it. In the beginning, I did a lot of presentations and education for them about what physical therapy or physical rehab could do for their patients, not just somebody who'd had a TPLO or a hip replacement. It's, we can help the patients with cancer, and especially the ones who'd had amputees and just your general senior pets, or even, maybe a puppy who's had some congenital issues and is a little bit wonky. We can help that. So for the most part, everyone was pretty interested and excited to hear about what their patients were going to be doing in therapy.
And were those the first lectures that you ever did?
No, the pediatric clinic that I was at previously, we had a bit of an interesting approach to, we did intensive therapy. So it's kind of like inpatient physical rehab. So some of the kids would come for 3-week intensives. They would come every day for a few hours at a time, work on like the next major milestone, or maybe they'd had surgery and were needing to regain stuff, but a lot of kids who were pretty significantly challenged. So we did presentations for the children's hospitals in the area and some of the other pediatric clinics and such to educate on that. And we utilized a suit therapy that's now, there's something called Theratogs that's primarily in kids, but it's an adult system too that is like, they call it therapy you wear. So it's kind of like all the benefits we get from taping, but that you don't have to have something on the skin. Anyway, so I did a lot of presentations with that, which was a benefit because when I interviewed at Sage, they did say, you're going to be doing some presentations. So I'm like, that's fine.
Because I know a lot of vet rehabbers, they find that first time that they have to do that lecture or presentation to vets very daunting.
Yeah, I've always found it to be easier to talk about work. It's all good.
Fine. Yeah.
It's a little scary at first, but once you get into it, it's a lot of fun. Giving them something different to think about. It's pretty fun.
So did COVID affect the practice and how you're practicing at all?
I did. So, well, at the end of 2018, I decided to leave Sage after over 10 years of full-time practice, since I had the opportunity to share a practice up in the South Lake Tahoe region. So I was essentially sharing a clinic that a veterinarian rehab vet had already set up. So she primarily wanted to stick with acupuncture and bring in someone else to kind of take over the rehab side. So she would do holistic and acupuncture and maybe introduce some hospice care. So I decided Tahoe's about 4 hours away from San Francisco. So it was a full, complete move, and did that for about 1.5 years and decided to come back to the Bay Area for a few different reasons. But that was actually right at the time that COVID was taking effect. So I actually signed our lease on the day that the restrictions were coming into effect in San Francisco. So it definitely affected what I was going to be able to do coming back. And then at Sage, like most places, clients were not allowed in, which was always a big part of my practice. For the most part, I always had the clients present for the sessions. And so I saw it as having to extend our bridge further to really help the clients feel involved, and would sometimes offer for some people to do like new visits where it really would have been beneficial to have them there for the whole time. I offered to have them FaceTime or, Zoom so that they could see what I was doing with their pet. That I tended to get more complicated cases that had been other places already. So it really emphasized how much communication is important in our practice. And it's not, of course, just working with the animals, but making sure the clients are understanding everything that's happening too.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's easier not to have a client there with some patients, but then
it can be,
you really need them because you like to get that feedback. So it's great to have them on Zoom. So I know recently there has been a whole lot of changes happening in California, and it sort of coincided with you making a little bit of a pivot in your career. Very excited to talk to you about Doggon Wheels. So in 2021, I think you started in January, Doggon Wheels. And first of all, tell me what's happening in California and sort of how that's affected you. And then tell me how you got into Doggon Wheels and how you acquired it, because that's a really going to be an interesting story for me.
Right. Well, in a nutshell, the veterinary board in California has been seeking to implement some changes as far as what the roles of physical therapists and other rehab practitioners may be. And so there's some changes that came into effect earlier this year about supervision levels and such. And so it's put some limitations on the types of practices that certified or licensed physical therapist can practice in. So, like the structure within SAGE is what they're seeking to have be the norm for direct supervision. So, it's just a little bit restrictive for physical therapists who want to have the ability to do home visits or still work in that collaborative environment, but under a referral basis. So that's made some ideas on what I'd like to be able to do, and also help with access to physical rehab, because not everybody can make it to the clinic or for various reasons. So that's something that we're working to help come into a model more like some states like Nevada, where in Tahoe, I had a license from the veterinary board as well as physical therapy board and had the ability to practice on a referral basis, or Colorado, some other states where it's a little bit less restrictive, I'll say.
I mean, not every area, has a big clinic like Sage with everyone under one roof, and it doesn't suit every pet owner, right? I mean, if I think about in my practice, I used to do mobile visits every now and again, but then when I got busy, I couldn't. And then I had other practitioners that I would refer those clients to. So if they phoned, I would say, can this person go mobile? So what you're saying now is that, only if the practitioner, say they're a PT, is under the supervision of a vet, could they go out and treat the patient, or would they have to go with the vet to go and treat the patient?
The way it's written now, the physical therapist would be considered, whether they're certified or not, an unlicensed veterinary assistant. So a veterinarian would have to be on site. Okay. So yeah, if it was equine or a home-based visit, you'd have to have a veterinarian there with you, which of course would be quite cost prohibitive for most people. So have that structure really be left to the rehab vets, which is great. But as we mentioned before, there's some patient populations where it would be great to have the expertise of a physical therapist, or our approach to still be able to work together, but not necessarily have to have somebody on site for that, or have like basically an outpatient clinic where not, of course, the patients who are critical or not medically stable would definitely be better seen in more hospital type setting like Sage, but the majority of rehab cases, like in the human world, would be cleared for medical therapy and be able to go to an outpatient clinic where maybe they're receiving acupuncture at the same time, but have physical therapists and rehab therapists and assistants on staff there.
So was this one of the reasons that you decided to buy Doggon Wheels?
It actually was. So the way that I had heard about it, I wasn't necessarily out, definitely not thinking of going out and buying a company and making wheelchairs, but another opportunity just kind of landed in my lap. So I had heard that the company, which was always my preferred company to work with as a physical therapist, based on the animal's needs, I had a few companies that I like to work with, but primarily I would wind up with Doggon Wheels for various reasons. And I had heard through one of our Facebook rehab groups that actually we were talking about what companies people liked. And a Canadian therapist had mentioned, that they were going to be closing, something related to actually possibly a COVID death in the family. And I was really just pretty shaken by that. And because the company had been around since, I think, 1998. And so I had worked with them all through they were in Hawaii when I first started working in rehab, and then they'd moved to Washington. And so I wound up reaching out to them and just emailed mainly to say thank you for everything over the years, and sent them a little video of one of my more recent patients that, the owner was convinced the dog would never take to a wheelchair, and expressed my condolences. And she wrote back and said, actually, they were considering buyers. So if I knew of anybody, I was like, well, my husband likes, he's mechanically inclined. And I'm like, well, let me think about if I can swing this. And so I brought it up and said, how you've always wanted to help animals, and what do you think about this? So we talked about it for a bit and decided to talk to them. And it just wound up being an opportunity that I felt we would be really missing if, we let it pass. And that also the company was closing. So I felt like it was going to leave a big hole in the market that, patients would be losing out on. And they have clients, or we have clients from all over the world. It's not just within the US now. So, but back to your question, it was getting to be pretty challenging working 10-hour days, or, a 40 plus, because, a 40-hour work week always for me would wind up being much longer with documentation. And, it's hard to say no to the Doberman who's tetraplegic in house, that could you just squeeze him in?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was with some of my own challenges. I decided that had a lot of potential to be able to pivot into a different direction and be able to lend my expertise to a different and possibly wider population.
Yeah. And so how's it going? I mean, how does it work? So you and your husband work together? Do you each have like specific jobs that you do?
We do. So Ron's my husband. He builds the frames. So we went and we spent a week with the owners before. It was also husband and wife, Lori and Chad. And so Ron learned how to make the frames. So everything is custom and handmade. And I do most everything else. So I sew the harnesses, and I talk to the clients and help with any consulting with the veterinary professionals. The clients, I do a lot of help with fitting and alignment and such, and answer a lot of questions. It's hard not to insert a lot of rehab stuff in there, but I do help if they're not working with a rehab professional in the area, or maybe they're not getting active therapy at the moment, then, I can offer some other resources to them, or maybe offer to help connect them with different rehab veterinarians and professionals in their area. So it's a neat way to be able to, again, educate people in that if they're coming and looking for a wheelchair because, maybe their dog is still paralyzed after surgery, with or without surgery. And they're like, okay, well, this is it. My dog's in a chair. I'm like, okay, we'll help you with that. And it's not the end of the road. There may be other things you can do. And even if they don't regain function of the limbs, there's still, some other things to do. So it's a great opportunity.
And what is unique about the Doggon Wheels?
It's just they're lightweight, and it's a lot of designs are similar these days. So one of the reasons that maybe I would choose a Doggon Wheels cart over some of the others available on the market is that I feel like they move with the dogs very well. So the saddle is neoprene, and some of the other companies have this now also. And one of the other features about it is that there's different axle positions available for a rear wheel cart. So some of the companies where it's you can customize it to the pet, but you may not be able to move where that rear wheel is in relation to the hip joint. So say you have like a senior dog who has weakness in the rear for whatever reason, whether it's orthopedic or neuro or both, but they also have some arthritis and other things going on. Maybe they have arthritis in the carpal joints, or they have, this nagging shoulder issue. If you move the wheels forward in front of their base of support in the back, you can actually off weight the front legs to some extent, or, counterbalance it a bit. So I always liked that option. And then you can move things around a bit more. The only thing you absolutely can't change is the width on it. But I've just found it to be a really flexible device. Even when I was still at Sage, I had a little 6-week-old Doberman puppy who she had a hemivertebrae at, I think, L3. And so in the beginning, she could walk, but she was starting to have trouble, and she wound up developing some scoliosis and such. So I got her into the wheels early, but because she was so small and she was a Doberman, I'm like, well, she's going to grow quickly. Yeah. So I had a great used car lot at my disposal. We had, certain used carts, and that's actually how I was introduced to the company. Is we had some donated ones at Sage that were Doggon Wheels, and so I had her in this Labrador sized cart, but she was a little puppy, but she grew into it very quickly. And then I wound up getting her a different cart for her when she was fully grown.
Yeah,
I find there's a lot of flexibility, and the animals take to them very quickly for that reason, I think.
So I think one of the challenges is to get that cart balanced. So, I see lots of videos. I mean, lots of pet owners sharing carts. And I'm always just horrified because I look at the carts and I think, oh my gosh, it'll be completely down in the front and all the weight on the dog's front legs, and they're trying to pull themselves and keep themselves up. So yeah, it's a big challenge. When I was in practice, I used to have a few sets of wheels that I used to those adjustable type wheels, and it was always a big challenge. And because I'm sort of A-type personality, it had to be completely perfect. I had to get it completely balanced. So those sidebars had to be parallel to the ground. And if they weren't, I was not happy. So it would take me a long time to get it right. But when it's right, then you see them move, and you see them comfortable, and you see them enjoying the cart. So it's so important.
Yeah, it used to. It sometimes it takes on my strength not to comment on some posts I see like that I'm like, well, they're happy and mobile. I don't need to say anything, but it's also, like you mentioned, if the cart isn't balanced properly, we know it can have such a detrimental effect down the line on, compounding factors and compensations and other issues. And it also takes away, or it kind of reinforces that belief that dogs or animals have to pull themselves in the wheels, which it shouldn't be. That they should be balanced and move with them and help them, and that it's a last resort, a method of last resort. So I feel like that's another reason that I was always an advocate of early mobility, probably from my background in pediatrics, where it's the same thing. You want to support your patient so that they can have that modified independence, as we call it, and let people know that it doesn't have to be the last ditch effort to get a wheelchair that they could. It's like for something with degenerative myelopathy, they could have a much longer survival rate if they're staying mobile and using their muscles appropriately instead of struggling, or even, following orthopedic surgeries as a temporary use.
So obviously it's been a massive learning curve, because I'm guessing that running a business like Doggon Wheels is very different to practicing as a vet rehab therapist. So what are the major things that you've learned?
It's time management. I thought I was pretty good at time management, but we are operating the business in addition to, other things going on. So that's a challenge in dealing with lots of different time zones and different types of communication. So that's when, and then even communication with, it can be challenging developing communication within your colleagues, but add in a marriage and that makes additional challenges. So those have been the main things. And just making sure that I was taking care of the company properly, because we didn't start it ourselves. I have felt additional pressure, making sure that we're upholding the company's reputation. And, we're not the most well-known company. A lot of people don't know about us, even if they've been practicing for a long time. But that was something that I liked, in that they weren't necessarily trying to provide carts to the masses, that it was, we're filling for pets that maybe the more readily available carts didn't quite work for.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a challenge and also learning how to ship internationally has been a big challenge, especially with COVID.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always checking. Someone just emailed and asked about a cart for a rabbit in Australia. And, did we ship to Australia? I'm like, well, let me see what the Postal Service says right now. Just a second.
Yeah.
Because they had stopped shipping to some companies and had delays and whatnot. So there have been other logistical challenges that I anticipated, but maybe not the full extent of.
So if there are vet rehabbers out there that are interested in looking at more info on Doggon Wheels, where would they find you?
Our website is doggon.com, doggon.com. And then I'm working on revamping that this year and adding more resources to it. But I also have social media. So on Facebook and Instagram, it's at Doggon Wheels LLC. And so I'm starting to add more videos of different types of animals and different, breeds of dogs in carts. And so that's a good way to contact also.
And so when Jenny's not making carts and talking to clients, so what do you do in your spare time?
Prior to COVID, I had been doing Ironman triathlons. So
okay, wow.
That's the crazy long distance that, at least for me, takes the full 17 hours allotted.
Yeah,
So
wow.
I had been sidelined for the last couple of years with some health challenges, but hoping, and if COVID allows, to go back and do those races that have been deferred. So we've got one in Ireland that's in August, and then to go back and repeat my first one, which is in Wales in September.
Okay.
So that takes a lot of biking and swimming. Thank you.
Yeah. Jenny, it's been so awesome to chat to you. And yeah, good luck with everything that you're doing with Doggon Wheels. And I'm sure it's going to go from strength to strength.
All right. Thanks so much. And I appreciate you reaching out and inviting me onto the podcast, Megan.
Have an awesome day, Jenny.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. And please, if you get a moment, head over to Stitcher or iTunes and leave me a review. It's a really lonely job being a podcaster, and so the only time I get to hear from you or know that you're out there is when I get a review. And know that I read every single one of your reviews. So to those of you that have left reviews, I want to say a very, very big thank you. Every time we get a review, it really helps to get the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast out there to all the vet rehabbers all over the world. All right, vet rehabbers, so if you are looking for more continuing education in the field of veterinary rehabilitation, head over to onlinepethealth.com. Go be awesome, guys.